Hi everyone, and welcome to this video series on the fundamentals of research. In this series, I've been going over the building blocks or the foundation of what you need to know in order to understand research methods. In previous videos, I went over concepts versus variables and the relationships between variables. In this video, which is part 4, I'll be going over theories and hypotheses. Let's first define what we mean by a hypothesis. So by way of definition, hypotheses are testable statements of presumed relationships between two or more concepts/variables. So they are statements of what we expect to find, not what has already been determined to exist. So what does that mean? Well, it means that if prior research has found that a relationship exists between two variables, then we don't have to necessarily do a study to see if that relationship exists. We don't need to hypothesize that that relationship exists because the prior studies found that it was the case. So hypotheses are testable statements of what we think a relationship might be between two variables because there isn't enough information to know for sure if that relationship exists. So let me give you an example. And by the way, we've had this as a hypothesis all along. We just didn't call it that. I know, it's shocking. So here it is. Experiencing child abuse increases the likelihood of abusing substances as a teen. It's not the greatest hypothesis in terms of wording, but it's a hypothesis. Now, if we were to put this in the form of a question, like, does experiencing child abuse increase the likelihood of abusing substances as a teenager, then that would be a research question. So you can see there's a link there. The hypothesis is linked to the research question because it's sort of like our answer to the research question in terms of what we think we'll find. So let's see. There are some important aspects of hypotheses. One, hypotheses are linked to theories. So I'm going to actually put a little pin in that because I'm not going over theories just yet. But I just want you at this point to know that hypotheses are linked to theories. They come from theories or they help build theories. I know, I shouldn't go into detail. Just know this for now. Let's see. Hypotheses clearly state the concepts involved. Like in our case, we had child abuse and teen substance abuse. Those were the concepts that we were interested in. Let's see. Number 3. Hypotheses specify an independent and dependent variable. So that's why I said earlier that it wasn't the greatest hypothesis, because even though we stated what the concepts were, we didn't really say how we're measuring them, like how we're actually measuring child abuse. So if we wanted like a really good hypothesis, we would have done that. Number 4, hypotheses indicate the type of the relation. Okay, whoops, grammar. Let's ignore that. Just start over. Hypotheses indicate the type of relationship between the variables specified. So is it a positive relationship, a negative relationship, a curvilinear relationship, a no relationship? That's all, right? Yeah, those are the types of relationships. Okay, let's see. Hypotheses are stated so that they can be tested and either verified or refuted. So that's that part about the testable statement. And all this means is that when we have a hypothesis, we know it's a hypothesis because we can test it. We can collect data and see if there's a relationship between child abuse and substance abuse. So there's a way to say, yes, this hypothesis seems true, or no, this hypothesis doesn't seem true. If we can't test that statement, then it's not a hypothesis. Okay, at this point, you may have a question that you're eagerly waiting the answer for. Dr. B, where does the hypothesis fit when it comes to the research process? I know all of you were thinking that, but here's the answer. That depends on the reasoning or logic of the research being conducted. Now, there are two types of reasoning: deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. Let me go over each one separately. So with deductive reasoning, it is what we call top-down. So it starts with the theory that already exists. And then, oh, wait, you're probably saying, hold on, Dr. B, what about what you said before in terms of hypotheses being linked to theories and that we would put a pin in it that we were going to go over later? And yes, we're going to go over that right now. So let's take that pin out. Sorry, my attempt at humor. Okay, so let's see. A theory is the answer to the question, why? So if we have a relationship that we think exists, like child abuse leading to teen substance abuse, then we have to ask ourselves, okay, well then why does this relationship exist? We need to know the answer to the question why in order to know what to do with it, how to solve the problem. So that's sort of the simplest definition of theory. That's the one I like to use. I know different books have different longer statements of what theories are, and that's fine. You should know that too. But essentially, that's what a theory is. Now let's look at an example. Why do some children who grow up in violent homes go on to become perpetrators of violence when they get older? Well, the answer to this question is based on a theory. And one theory could be social learning theory, that what we see growing up and is our modeled behavior that then we take on and engage in that behavior ourselves. Okay, so let's go back to deductive reasoning. So as I said before, it starts with a theory. So someone has already come up with, social learning theory, attachment theory, etc. And we want to test that theory, maybe with a new population or a different variable that might be of interest. So from that theory, then comes the hypothesis. So let's say we have social learning theory that's been very well established, but, and I'm just making this up, no one has looked at the relationship between domestic violence and growing up to become a perpetrator of violence. And so we come along and we say, we think this relationship exists because the theory says that it will. So then we collect our observations, we collect our data in order to test that hypothesis. And then once we have the observations and we've done our data analysis, then we can confirm or not confirm the theory. Okay? So it's kind of a loop, if you will. A little staircase loop. But you can see here that the theory and the hypothesis are very closely linked. And then the study is trying to confirm the hypothesis. Because if we confirm the hypothesis and the hypothesis came from the theory, then that means that there's evidence for this theory. And this process is called theory testing, because the theory already exists and we're using a hypothesis to test whether there's further evidence for it. And that's also why we say it's top down, because we're starting with the top, which is the theory, and then working our way down to then test that theory. Okay, let's move on to inductive reasoning. This is sort of the opposite loop, where we start with the data. Now, why would we do that? Well, it's because we have a research question in this case, but it's about a topic that we don't know a whole lot about in terms of research. So let's say, and this is a true statement, that there's not a lot of research on the experiences of LGBTQ youth in the foster care system. Okay, and so we want to know what those experiences are so that we can help those youth. Well, because there isn't a lot of research out there, what we may have is just that general research question of what these experiences are, and then we collect data, usually qualitative, in-depth interview data. so that we can really understand what's going on through the voices of the youth in this study. This is different than with deductive reasoning, which is mostly quantitative, gathering surveys from a large sample of participants and trying to test that theory via that data. But with inductive reasoning, because we don't have a hypothesis to test at this point, we're just starting with the data. And then after we collect some data, we start to notice some patterns that may emerge. And these are sort of tentative patterns. So as we start seeing these emerge, we start looking to see if additional interviews also have these patterns. And there might be a loop here where we go back to the data that we looked at before, but eventually we come up with a pattern. So in our case, let's say we find that the LGBTQ youth in our study are experiencing high levels of depression, more so than their counterparts. Well, based on that, we come up with a tentative hypothesis. And we say LGBTQ youth experience higher levels of depression than their counterparts in the foster care system. And then when we come up with that hypothesis, we might also think about a theory that would explain that hypothesis. So we look back to our data. All the way back. And we look and see what could be happening in the lives of these youth that is leading to that depression. And lo and behold, let's say, and I'm making this up, although I think it's true from my cursory reading of other research on this, that LGBTQ youth in the foster care system experience a lot of isolation. And this isolation is due to discrimination, so maybe in their foster homes, or also, parents who don't visit, things like that. So we say, okay, we think that this pattern that we've observed, this hypothesis that we've come up with, exists because they are isolated. And then we go back again to our observations to see if there's further evidence of that isolation. And this pattern, this loop, I should say, can happen many times in order to really discover what theory is happening. And so that's why we call inductive reasoning theory building, because we're starting with the data and we're trying to come up with a theory, to build a theory. That's also why we call this type of inductive reasoning bottom up, because we're starting with the bottom where the data are, at the ground, if you will, and then coming up with theory. And so sometimes this is called grounded theory, because the theory is grounded in the data. Okay, just some terminology. Okay, there are also different types of hypotheses. There's what's called a null hypothesis, a one-tailed alternative hypothesis, and a two-tailed alternative hypothesis. The last two there are called alternative because they're alternatives to the null hypothesis. A null hypothesis states that no relationship exists between the independent variable and the dependent variable. So let's come up with a different research question about whether or not the level of depression affects the average number of hours worked per day. So a null hypothesis would say there is no relationship between depression score and the average number of hours worked in a day. So in terms of that graph that that was in the previous videos, it would look something like this. As depression increases, the average number of hours stay the same. So there might be little blips here and there, but it's essentially the average is the same across the depression scores. So this is a visual of what a null hypothesis would look like. But essentially all you need to know is that it just means no relationship exists. Okay? And then we have a one-tailed alternative hypothesis, and it's alternative to the null. So if the null is saying no relationship exists, then a one-tailed alternative hypothesis is saying that yes, this relationship exists. And in fact, it provides the direction of the relationship. Okay, so the hypothesis will be stated in a way to show whether we think it's a positive or a negative relationship. Let me give you an example. The higher the depression score, the more number of hours worked in a day. So this statement is saying that there's a positive relationship between depression and number of hours worked in a day. Graphically, is that a word? This is what it would look like. As depression score increases, the average hours worked per day increases. Or it could be a negative relationship. The higher the depression score, the fewer the number of hours worked in a day. So it would look like this. As depression increases, hours worked decreases. So that's a negative relationship. But in both cases, we've provided the direction, right? And that's a one-tailed alternative hypothesis. One-tailed meaning it's going in one direction, and that direction could be positive or negative, but it's a direction. Versus a two-tailed alternative hypothesis, which indicates that there is a relationship, we expect a relationship, but we're not sure what direction it'll go in. So we don't indicate the type of relationship. For example, experiencing abuse as a child affects abusing substances as a teen. We know this relationship exists, but we don't know whether child abuse is going to increase the likelihood of abusing substances or decrease the likelihood of abusing substances. We just know that there is a relationship there. Okay, so it's called two-tailed because it's going any direction, if you will. Okay, so here are some examples of different hypotheses, and I'll go through them, give you a little moment to answer my questions, and then I'll tell you the answers. Okay, here we go. There is a relationship between the number of hours spent studying for an exam and performance on that exam. So what do we think? Do we think that this is a null hypothesis, one-tailed hypothesis, or a two-tailed hypothesis? Do 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 do. Okay. For those of you who know Jeopardy. Okay, let's see. We think, and we're confident in this thought, that this is a two-tailed alternative hypothesis. Why is it two-tailed? Because it's just saying that there is a relationship, but we don't know how number of hours spent studying is going to affect the exam performance. Is it the case that the more people study, the better they'll do? Or is it the case that the more they study, like overstudy, for example, the worse they'll do? We don't know, but we know that there is a relationship, and we're going to test that to hypothesis. Here's another one. This one's a little tricky, so we'll go step by step. I won't give you time to contemplate. So children who participate in Head Start programs will have greater reading comprehension as measured by the reading scale, which ranges from 0 to 10, with 10 being perfect comprehension, compared with children who do not participate in Head Start. Now, this is an interesting one, right? Because this is a really good hypothesis. It provides the variable in addition to the concept. So reading scale is operationalized. Ooh, going all the way back to the beginning. Okay, let's see. So we have children who participate in Head Start will do better on reading than those who don't. Because we're saying they'll do better, then that means that this is a positive relationship. If you participate, if you go from no participation to participation, you're increasing in something, then the better the reading comprehension. Okay, so it's a positive relationship. Oh, I didn't say what kind of hypothesis it is. So because we've provided the direction, it would be a one-tailed alternative hypothesis. Yay! Okay. Among individuals trying to abstain from alcohol, the higher the number of AA meetings attended per month, the higher the number of days sober that month. it's a one-tailed alternative hypothesis because it's saying that there will be a positive relationship, that as the number of AA meetings increases, so too does the number of days sober that month. Teens from homes with two married parents will have lower truancy rates, measured as average number of days per month truant from school during the school year, than teens from single parent homes. So let's break this down. We have marital status as our independent variable, and it has two categories, single or married. So for our purposes, when we're trying to graph this, for example, we would consider single to be fewer than married, because a single parent household has one parent, whereas a married household has two parents. I'm not making any judgment about, what less than or better than or whatever. I'm just saying number wise, we're going from 1 to 2. Okay. So as we go from 1 to 2, where we're increasing, truancy rates are decreasing. So this is a negative relationship. And in terms of what type of hypothesis, what do you think? If I was Dora the Explorer, I would say, yeah, you got it. It's a one-tailed hypothesis. Sorry, I just really love that movie. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it. These are the sources of the images, and this is the end of this video series. Thank you for sticking through with it, and I hope to see you in some other videos. So thank you for watching, and have a great day. Bye.